Hey, welcome to Brisbane Small Business, the Business Small Business Show of BSB TV. Today, I've got Trevor Evans, our local MP in Canberra, to have a chat with us about JobKeeper, JobSeeker. Really, I've invited him on to talk about sole traders, micro and small business, and what's happening in the world and how Canberra can help us. So, Trevor, thank you very much for coming on today.
Pleasure, Kevin. Great to be back here.
And it's only a quarter since it's 3 months since we caught up, and it seems like we're in a whole new different world.
It's incredible to think about how much has changed in the sort of 9 or 10 weeks since we were last here. If my memory serves, we spent a lot of time last time I was on talking about eligibility for that cash flow boost and people potentially being able to access the refunds into their activity accounts. We talked a lot about the need to find some sort of settlement for landlords and tenants. And I think from memory, if we check our diaries, JobKeeper hadn't even been announced at that time. So there's been a fair bit happen.
It was a few days before that, and so much has happened. Look, JobKeeper and JobSeeker both have been an absolute godsend for a safety net for so many people, but still a lot tended to have missed out. And I guess when you're trying to do so many things so quickly, some people are always going to fall through the cracks, but it's one of the great challenges that we do have. So how can you help us with that?
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. It's really important that people who have fallen through the cracks come to their representative and people like me to get their stories known. Policy making and decision making is continuing to happen really, really quickly, and we're continuing to run the ruler over ways that we can help, and where there's clear gaps in the system, we're very, very keen to do what we can to address them. I actually want to spend just a couple of moments, if I can, talking about the sort of stack of policy options that there are available for micro businesses and sole traders, particularly ones without employees, because even my experience just this weekend on the streets of Brisbane at the markets and at my mobile office tells me that there's still a lot of people out there that assume that they're not eligible for things when they actually are. JobKeeper, for instance, we put a lot of discretion, we built a lot of discretion for the ATO and others into that system, so that the tax commissioner has been able to continually update the approach that the ATO will take to JobKeeper. And what it means is that a lot of people who assumed or thought that they weren't eligible a couple of months ago now definitely are eligible. I was speaking to a market stall holder at the Milton Markets actually, and she said, oh, well, of course I'm not eligible because I run my small business through a trust. And you know, the approach of the ATO now is to allow even blind trusts to appoint a single beneficiary to be able to receive JobKeeper. I was speaking to a guy at Tenerife at the side of the road at my mobile office just on the weekend. He said, well, I understand that my business won't be eligible for JobKeeper. I immediately went to look at JobSeeker, and I didn't think that, well, I'm not eligible because, of course, you know, the assets of my family are significant. And I said, there is no assets test. We've removed it for JobSeeker. It's only about your family income. In recent times, assets, we've taken those tests off the table. So what I encourage all small business owners to do is to go specifically to the ATO advice on sole traders and go through. It's an 8-page, I think 7-page document which sets out the eligibility criteria. And a lot of people who are set up as trusts, as partnerships, even as active shareholders in their company, find out that they will often be eligible when they thought that they weren't. It's not just a scheme for employees. It's also a scheme that allows often a single individual associated with the running of a small business or a micro business to be eligible. So I do encourage people to go and double check that advice. If not, do try your eligibility for JobSeeker as opposed to JobKeeper. A lot of the tests have been either completely removed or at least relaxed around waiting times, around asset tests, even around income tests. The income test is more relaxed than it used to be under the old JobSeeker. And then finally, of course, if neither of those schemes work, keep in mind that the federal government has provided small business lenders with guaranteed funding for small business owners, so that people with successful businesses can just lend unsecured, interest-free periods to get the cash flow to keep very viable and successful businesses going through these times. And as a final point, if all else is lost and those options aren't available to you, keep in mind that there is that ability to access your super as a last resort. Between all of those schemes, lots of the small business owners, particularly sole traders that I've been speaking to, usually end up being eligible for at least one or two of those 4 stacks of policies. But as I said, if people have navigated all of those and they still find that they're falling through the cracks, I want to know those stories and I want to be able to tell them here in Canberra.
So I'm glad, and I'm glad that you mentioned that. I was at a function the other day where I do have some friends that are bankers. I know that's a horrible discussion, a horrible admission to make, but they're actually nice people too. So, and they were talking about their view on the eligibility of a successful business. And one of them brought up, but if they've accessed their 10,000 in supers, surely that's financial hardship. We can't consider them for a loan, right? And immediately, and the other one responded, well, of course not, because they're showing that they're in financial distress. Now, of course, that is contrary to what your policy, I believe, was meant to be about. The financial hardship of the current time period should be set aside to, was it successful business before, and is it likely to be a successful business in the future? And they were just looking at the facts of the matter right now. And that seemed to be, and they were from 2 different banks. So it seems to be, and 2 fairly major banks. And so it seems to be that their interpretation of financial hardship is very different from the government's.
A lot of the decision making and a lot of the regulations that exist in the banking and finance sector are not actually government regulations. They're the rules of operating that those businesses have actually imposed on themselves inside of their own businesses. And what that means is you can get very different outcomes with the same business case going to different lenders. And it does reinforce that real need to shop around. To be clear, what the government hasn't done is said free automatic rights to loans across the board. What we've said is, to the extent that banks and other lenders to small business are indeed assessing applications for loans, we are guaranteeing those loans 50%. We are requiring that in order to access the government money to back up those loans, the small business lender is not allowed to demand security behind those loans. So no more of this, small business owners having to put their house on the line for their line of cash flow in these times. And we've also insisted on there being interest-free periods. So that doesn't mean everybody automatically gets a loan, but it does mean that small business lenders should be more prepared and more able to give loans in those times, in those circumstances, to the sorts of businesses that we know are viable long-term and are just going through a very defined short-term downturn because of social distancing or other restrictions in these times.
Yeah, the social distancing, of course, did have an impact far broader than just the specific industries that had the distancing requirements. And there seems to have been in some different support schemes an overweighting to only those businesses that had a direct impact, and forgetting the rest of society and how they've been impacted. Many small businesses that, even consulting businesses that would traditionally be out on client sites, were dramatically affected, even though they were able to do some form of work around it, still had that. So there needs to be that understanding that it's not just your cafes and your tourisms and everything. And of course, they are absolutely the hardest hit when they had to shut down 100%, borders are closed, all that sort of thing. And if you can speak to Anastasia Palisade and get our border open, that'd be really lovely too. I know you're doing what you can. But is there any plan to help that broader sector?
I guess, the strength of schemes like JobKeeper and the expanded Job Seeker program were that we took a very deliberate decision early on, at least as a federal government, that we would bring in economy-wide support where the eligibility did not depend on the sector that you were in. Obviously, a couple of sectors are much harder hit. Sectors like hospitality, like tourism, like aviation, like international education, those sectors are particularly hard hit, but the criteria that we brought in means that a business which is hard hit, are able to apply under those economy-wide measures. An alternative outcome would have been for us to try to focus on sector by sector plans, which is how many governments overseas have approached this, and how indeed Australian federal governments in decades gone past responded to various crises and catastrophes. What I would say is we are now moving out of the crisis management phase, at least with respect to the health side of COVID-19. The economic side is still revealing itself, and circumstances are continuing to change. But I think everyone can recognise that the federal government is starting to move away from just the crisis management side to starting to think about that medium-term future, and we're starting to think about the sorts of policies, settings that we need to really allow everybody to get back into full economic participation as quickly as possible. Hence the home builder scheme announced recently, hence the job maker focus on skills and vocational education and the training that we're going to need going forwards, and hence the attempt to take the partisanship out of industrial relations and really give everyone, business groups and unions, the opportunity to come to us with some commonly held positions that we might be able to enact as new laws to get employment really, really firing again. What I would say is there are many policy options out there that are definitely under active consideration. September is a long way away. September, October, when the current policies have run their announced course and when the next federal budget will be held, is much further away than the time that's elapsed between our last two chats. And as we've seen, a lot can change in that time. If things are still as bad as they've been over the last couple of months, as we head into September, October, I think everybody could expect to see ongoing economy-wide support and assistance. But if, as seems to be the current expectation, things start to improve, even if they improve unevenly between different sectors and different industries across the Australian economy, I think what we can probably expect, and I'm not pre-announcing any government decisions here, I'm just simply saying as an observer of politics, as somebody who's seen a number of economic responses over many years, I think what you would expect to see is possibly not a simple extension of JobKeeper and other programs, but a replacement of them by more targeted measures, which either focus on the businesses that are still left behind as others are starting to stand on their own 2 feet again, or possibly things which do target the sectors that are still hardest hit for particular reasons, or a combination of both of those. All of those things are under active consideration. I note that the announcements certainly haven't stopped in recent times. We're starting to see, we saw childcare announcements recently. The employment minister is out this morning talking about an extension to the instant asset write-off for a further 6 months to help anyone bring forward their investments. And I guess what I'm saying is watch this space. Well before September, October, the way forwards will be much clearer, both to general society and to the government. And the sort of fast-moving policy and decision-making we've seen over the last few months is definitely going to continue. And I should have a lot more to report back on after the next 2 weeks down here in Parliament.
Absolutely. So we will commit you to catching up with us after this time period. We might try and make it a bit sooner and make it just around about the month time period. So if that's okay with you, because
Sure.
Things are still moving fairly rapidly. They are still, at this stage, it's still really early days about how we're going to recover. I appreciate the fact that you've given us a time this morning. I know that you're running late to a committee meeting already, and I appreciate the fact that you've put that off just to speak to us this morning. So thank you very much for your time.
Absolute pleasure, Kevin. And congratulations, by the way, on the input that you had in creating a new small business grants process in the state of Queensland. So successful that many of my local small businesses, including my parents' small business, missed out in the rush to go for that grant. So, you know, the power of small businesses coming together in a space like the one that you convene it can't be underestimated. So keep up the good work on behalf of Brisbane small businesses.
Absolutely. Look, the grants went so fast that I wasn't able to get clients involved. So, yeah, I was too busy fighting for the grant to happen. And then when it did, it was, oh my good. I couldn't do anything. So, but thank you very much for acknowledging that. I really do appreciate it. I really appreciate your time this morning. Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin. Keep up the good work.
Thanks a lot. See you later.
See ya.